Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I think we are all excited. It's my honor to welcome you all to our DesignFest event. I would like to start with our beloved dean, instructors, students, and dear guests. Welcome to DesignFest 2024, Shaking Boundaries. I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for your cooperation before, through, and I'm sure at the end of the DesignFest event. This year, under the theme of Shaking Boundaries, our aim was to encourage more students, more involved and participated to our events, as well as acknowledging, gaining acknowledgement through our seminars and festivals. Accordingly, as the activity commission, me and our staff, we had gathered with you and we have listened to you. We wanted to ask, what do you want from our festival? We had several meetings and we have collaborated with you, dear students. The feedbacks from our previous years and the nice discussions with you, we have proposed several workshops, seminars, an Instagram competition again this year, and an urban tour. I am proud to announce that the Faculty of Architecture has proposed 14 workshops this year. These workshops are all categorized into various sub-themes, all aligned with the overarching theme of shaking. For example, like 3 of the workshops which were focused on earthquake and post-disaster scenarios. 4 workshops have explored the themes related with the urban boundaries, cognitive urban space and narrative, and 2 more workshops have dedicated the integration of artificial intelligence in architecture education, and 1 workshop that which takes in UTAM, and you are designing your personal storages, like which was a need for you, and you are designing and making the mock-ups for that. We hope that all the workshops and the seminars will not be only informative, but also engaging and fun for you. Lastly, I would like to invite you to all our Instagram competition award ceremony tomorrow and our closing session where all the products of the workshops will be exhibited tomorrow at 4 o'clock in Architecture Additional Studio. We hope to see you all there. Now, I would like to give the word to our beloved Dean, Professor Dr. Meltem Gürel. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeynep. Welcome, everyone, to this year's DesignFest. This is the 4th event of the annual series, which is organized by our Faculty of Architecture here at Yaşar University. Our first meeting was launched in 2020, following an international event called Building for Humanity, which was organized in 2019. This event inspired us to open a platform for discussions and knowledge on current issues on the built environment in general. We have called this annual event DesignFest, which suggests our understanding and interpretation of the terms design and festival as more comprehensive concepts than usually understood. Here, we think of design as a field of statements that form the built environment, and design as informative event that feeds knowledge, discussions, and debates on current topics which are relevant to the built environment in general. With this stance, we have been addressing the theme of boundaries and interpreting boundary as a permissible, changeable, and questionable notion. This year, we continue to explore the concept of boundaries under the theme of shaking boundaries with reference to and in commemoration of last year's devastating earthquakes. Hence, we would like to reflect on the topic of earthquakes while exploring different perspectives of the theme by bringing academia and practice together in a variety of events here. The theme of Shaking Boundaries follows the previous themes of questioning boundaries last year in 2023 and circulating boundaries in 2022 and breaking boundaries in 2021. We have already started the week with a number of workshops. They're continuing today, this morning. They're open to the participation of all of our students. Today, we will have an opportunity to listen to distinguished scholars and professionals through a series of seminars and a panel in the afternoon. A very warm welcome to all of our speakers. We deeply appreciate your presence and contribution to this year's DesignFest. Before we start with our first speaker, Mauricio, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to a number of people who put in considerable amount of time and effort into realizing this event here today. First, a big thank you to our Vice Dean, Zeynep Sevinç-Karcı, for her coordination. Many thanks to our faculty members who were in the organizing committee, namely Arzu Gilasun Kundracı, Matthew Pedergana, and Sergio Tadonio. And of course to our research assistants, Müge Sever, Begüm Sena Önal Özmalatyalılar, Ömercan Bakan, Deniz Engin, Berfin Yıldız, and İrem Deniz Akçam Ergin. I would also like to thank to our part-time student assistants, Gamze Eneş, Yasemin Mısırlı, and İlke Sönmezler for their support in organizing the event. Finally, I would very much like to thank to all our contributors and participants for sharing DesignFest with us. Thank you for being here and enjoy this year's DesignFest.
Hello all. I would like to invite our first speaker, Assistant Professor Dr. Mauricio Beltran, Gabriel Beltran, and he's with us at Yaşar University as an assistant professor since 2018 and as a lecturer since 2014. And he's an architect and a structural engineer with his PhD studies finalized on energy-based seismic design of tall buildings at Delft University in 2018. As we may guess, he has broad experience in architectural education and integrating structural design and building technology subjects in studio and other creative courses. So I'm with his in-depth research on seismic design and architectural design relationship. I would like to welcome him for his speech on understanding soft story in Türkiye, an interdisciplinary perspective about the last earthquake. We would like to welcome you here.
Right. Okay, now you can hear me. Well, thank you very much. First of all, for the invitation and also the opportunity to talk about the things that I think we all should know here. What I'm going to attempt today in the morning is to try to provide everyone with a perspective about the soft story from, let's say, several points of view. It might not be necessarily consistent, so I warn you in advance. So the things might not be necessarily all connected, because that is exactly the point I'm trying to make. that in order to understand the problem of soft story, we need to look from different perspectives. I'm going to start with some information that I think might be familiar to all the people who are in this room, which is related with the earthquake we had in 2020 here in Izmir. There were 17 buildings that collapsed. And there was a survey after the earthquake on more than 150,000 buildings. And it turns out that more than 50 buildings were classified as collapsed building, even though they didn't literally fall itself. And there were many others classified with several levels of damage. So among many reasons for those buildings to be damaged in an earthquake, and I have to say this is written there, it says it's unexpected damage. Why unexpected? Because this was not a very big earthquake. It's not classified as a large earthquake. However, why there was so much damage? First of all, there was a lot of poor construction quality. The quality of the construction was really, really bad on those buildings. There is a lack of proper detailing. If there are engineers in the audience, they will understand better, but it refers to the amount of reinforcement bars in the concrete. And there are two aspects that might start sounding familiar to us, in general, to architects. The presence of overhangs. What is an overhang? Basically a cantilever, basically balconies. The presence of a lot of balconies and soft stories in the ground floor, which is the topic of today. Now let's talk a bit, again, some facts about the building stocks. In Turkey, around 90% of the buildings are residential. 80% are reinforced concrete. 50% of the buildings that are in Turkey has no legal authorization to be built. 50%, half of the buildings you see across the country has no building permission. And this percentage increases to 70% when it comes to big cities, as Izmir. And 35% above that percentage was built before the year 2000. This last information is gonna become relevant towards the end of this presentation. So that is the state of the building stock, like they say, the building construction. What happens with the earthquake? Well, 70% of the population of Turkey is living in a first or second earthquake zone. These earthquake zones are defined by the Turkish earthquake code. This is the last version. So basically, speaking in a very rough way, the reddish, the darker the color on that map means the larger the danger, the higher the danger to a very large earthquake. And as it goes wider, it means less probability, actually, it's based on probability of having a large earthquake. And 90% of the buildings, the existing buildings, fall into these either zones. These are very, very, I would say, shocking facts, the ones I'm showing you there. In 2016, Bigche made a study, a database, about the relationship between fatality, damage, and earthquakes between 1900 and 2014. And these are the major four conclusions. The first two, the most of lives were lost in earthquakes ranging between 7.5 and 7.9. Most of the buildings collapsed in ranges between 7 and 7.4. That is if you look at all these earthquakes. But the second, the two at the bottom are the most important one. 1 out of 4 earthquakes, 5.5 and less will cause death, will kill people. And again, 5.5 magnitude is a very low earthquake. It's not even a moderate earthquake. It's considered a small earthquake. And according to the statistics, 1 out of 4 will make buildings damage and will kill people. And again, statistically speaking, we have an earthquake in Turkey killing people and destroying buildings once every 4 years. So the last earthquake was in 2023. So probably before 2027, we will hear about other earthquake, a new earthquake, unfortunately killing people and destroying buildings in Turkey. So what about the soft story? How this is related with the soft story? Well, soft story in combination with another problem, which is called short columns, are the parameters that influence the most in the negative performance of the buildings. In other words, they create a lot of collapse and damage. And all these effects are enhanced, or in this case, exacerbated negatively by the presence of overhangs, again, balconies. In Bayrakli, here in Izmir in 2020, out of the 11 buildings that collapsed during the earthquake, 9 of them presented soft story. And a last fact that is not related with Turkey, but is important. In the 1995 earthquake in Kobe, in Japan, they realized afterwards that buildings presenting soft story has 3 times more chance to collapse during an earthquake. Okay, but what is a soft story? I've been talking about that, and the presentation is about soft story. What is a soft story? So here's where I have to go to the models, because I have to introduce first a very basic concept, so which is stiffness. So if you look at here, I'm gonna show you that relationship that you see there. It says F is equal to K times D. K is the stiffness, F is the force. So this load is gonna represent the load, is gonna be force. And then I'm gonna put this bar here in the middle. So you have these supports. And if I put this guy here, what is gonna happen, of course, is gonna bend. So you see, you have the same scheme that you see there, a bending element and a load in the middle. Now, I'm gonna keep the same conditions. I'm gonna keep the force, but I'm gonna change the bar. I'm gonna put it here again, and I'm gonna apply the same force. But you see that there is no deformation. There is a deformation. The point is we cannot see it. Now, what is the difference between these two? The load is the same. The force is the same. So if you look at these two equations here, F didn't change, but something changed with the stiffness, because now here there is no deformation, and in this case there was a lot of deformation. That difference is called stiffness, and it's very important in structures. We need to provide stiffness. Now, you can say, all right, I get it, but you're talking about earthquakes. Well, in earthquakes, and now I have to bring this guy here. In earthquake, we also have forces, but the forces are slightly different. So this is a homemade shaking table. So you see now the load is here, but it's gonna be on top. So of course, the structure is under load, under vertical load, but during an earthquake, what we have is ground motion. So if we move the ground, you see what is happening. The building is developing forces, not because something is actually pushing it, it's because of the ground motion. So the forces are coming from that equation, mass times the acceleration. So the larger the mass, the larger the acceleration. And then we represent those forces as an inverted triangle, like you see here in this picture of a different model. So we assume that there is a set of forces acting sideways, but actually this is the situation. This also leads you to realize that the larger the mass, the larger the earthquake forces. So heavier buildings are gonna attract more forces. So in order to resist these lateral forces, we have lateral forces resistance systems for earthquake design. The most common one is moment frames. We can also have brace frames, and we can have shear walls. Unfortunately, in Turkey, the most common is the worst, which is moment frames. I'm not gonna get tired of saying this. Moment frames are the worst system for seismic resistance. In Turkey, we should not be building with moment frames. We should move gradually to the best, which are shear walls. Again, I can explain that, but this is not the point of this presentation. So you have to trust me at this point. So what is the soft story actually? The soft story basically is an irregular distribution of lateral stiffness. When I show you first, you saw that the deformation is quite regular. But now I'm gonna use another model, which is this one. And in this model, I have done two things that are very common here in Turkey. One is I create an artificial rigid plane on top, and I increase the height of the ground floor story, which is also very common. So now I need to move this guy. Here. Sorry, it takes a little bit of time, but it's gonna be fine soon. By the way, we developed these models for a project, and all these models, all these videos are in YouTube. So you can see all these, the same thing I'm doing, you can see it there in videos. So same story, when I put the load on top. But the difference, you're gonna see the difference. Before, just to remind you, before the deflection was very much, you can see it even here, is very, the deformation is very much distributed along the height. But now you're gonna see what is happening is very much different. I hope you see it. This part is not deflecting at all. It cannot move because of this restriction. So all the deformation is taken by the column that is free, which is what is expressed there in the same picture. Now, what is gonna happen? That the column that is taking all the deformation is gonna also collapse, and usually the building is gonna break, and the rigid part is gonna fall on top of the ground floor. Now, how can we create, or no, we don't create it, but how this soft story can be produced? One way is by removing a structural element as is represented there. You might say, well, that is very, very rare that we could do that. Well, this is a real picture from Izmir, and you can see that the column was removed, which is exactly what's creating a soft story. Of course, this is a top story, which causes less problem, but nevertheless, it causes problems. Another way to create a soft story mechanism is by increasing the height of any floor. Usually, again, we do it in the ground floor, but it could happen at any floor. In this case, in the first one, as it expresses there in the drawing. And the most common one, the one that is, I would say, the general cause in Turkey, is the use of infill masonry, either bricks or even concrete blocks, to cover the upper stories and leaving the ground floor free without. So what happens is more or less what I was trying to show you in the model. This is that the entire block moves without any deformation, and the whole deformation is taken there. Now, I'm gonna go here to talk about some reports of soft story, where this started. The first notion we have about soft story was due to an earthquake in United States in 1971. This really, blurry picture is one of the wings of a hospital. There were 4 wings, and the shear wall that you see there, this one, did not reach the foundations did not reach the ground floor. So it was open here, therefore causing what I just explained you is a soft story. Now, the soft story concept was never mentioned before. It didn't exist. So this is the first time appear in literature where from this engineer in 1973. Then another engineer, here you can see better a diagram, a drawing. You can see how the soft story mechanism actually was created here. You can see the damage in the columns. Again, we're talking about 1970s. Another engineer also used the concept of this soft story. Soft basically means flexible. So they're saying, look, we need rigidity to resist the lateral forces, but this floor is flexible, is elastic. And that is the concept of soft story stuck. Then unfortunately, the concept of soft story became really well known dramatically after an earthquake in Mexico in 1985, and where more than 200 multi-story reinforced concrete buildings collapsed, and around 8%, just please keep this number in mind, 8%, because I'm going to show you some statistic in Turkey that number is really, really high. But here in 1985 in Mexico, 80% of those buildings present soft story. 1992, here in Turkey, the first earthquake we have, the concept was mentioned in our report. I don't mean it was the first time we have a soft story, but it was mentioned. Again, see, this is what I was saying before, 12,000 buildings, 12,000 buildings were damaged, and 8,000 were collapsed or heavily damaged. More than 30% of reinforced concrete buildings were heavily damaged. And most of the damage was in multi-story buildings made out of reinforced concrete and having soft stories. So I'm showing you how this relationship between reinforced concrete, multi-story buildings start growing, and it started growing in Turkey long ago. I'm going to show you later. In 1995, as I mentioned before, in Japan, we have also soft story. This is a table just to show what I explained before, that the chance of a building collapsing was 3 times higher if it had soft story. We have soft stories in India, an earthquake in India, an earthquake in Taiwan. By the way, there was another earthquake in Taiwan. We just heard. We had soft stories in Iran and also in Indonesia in 2004. Although, of course, the disaster, major disaster, was due to the tsunami after the earthquake. We had soft story collapse in Pakistan. We also had in Chile in 2007, there was a 2-story house, and you see that the ground floor is completely lost. And we had also soft story collapse in earthquakes in Italy. Now, there are solutions. Engineers have proposed solutions, because what I'm showing you is a problem that so far has around 50 years. So you might say, well, have anyone thought about how we can fix these problems? Yes, engineers have. And most of the intervention has to do with making interventions externally. You cannot intervene the column itself, because then you will have to change the concrete and they have to change the reinforced bar, which is very expensive and very, very impractical. So the retrofitting solutions are in the way that increasing the size of the column or adding properties to the column. The Turkish code 2007 explains some ways to produce the reinforcement. Another solution is to separate the infill walls from the upper frames. And another solution, of course, is to give enough rigidity to the soft story by adding, for example, braces. And from there, we have several type of proposals, adding braces here, For example, the cross braces, this is called chevron. Some dampers here, hysteretic dampers. Then I have hybrid combination. And then this is a different type of dampers called viscous dampers. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail of everything, but what I want to point out here is that there are ways, and of course, all these are research papers, so there is a study behind that proves how much it can, the performance of the building improve or eliminate the negative effects of the soft story by adding this. Again, for example, here you have a more, let's say, realistic, because before it was very schematic. You have the braces connected to the frame, and then here you have a hysteretic damper in another position, but basically doing the same. And again, here, other one, I think this is a friction damper, all different type of dampers. Now, what I'm going with this, you can say, where are you going with all these braces? What I'm trying to show you, here's another one, which it works with some sort of tension elements. So you kind of pull until you control the deformation. Now, my interest with this one is to show you that there is a missing point here, which is when the engineers try to solve the soft story, they forget about the users. And they forgot a very important point. The soft story is not a design decision. It responds to users. So here's where I think, in order to solve the problem, because again, these solutions that I've been showing you, they exist, and they have been studied, and they are proposed, and they work. They are making tests, real scale tests, to prove that they work. You might ask why they are not being applied if they can work. The reason is because they are clashing with a very basic notion, which is soft story is created because of the users, because people want to use the ground floor as a commercial area. So when you think, again, the conceptual solution says, okay, well, let's make the column stronger, let's add buttresses, or let's put a brace, or let's add more columns. Then we did this very basic example. We took a picture here in Oscan, and then we add the things, and then we start asking the people, what do you think? And of course, no one wants the brace added there in the place you're having a coffee or whatever. I mean, it's not part, it's not something that is going to be accepted by the users, no matter how much you promote the seismic benefits. This is a research we also did here. We proposed separating the walls, the upper walls. That was not our idea. That is being proposed, so we decided to study. So we took this building that, again, this is an existing building from Izmir, which has the soft story, as you can see there. So we separate the buildings, and we study if we could do it, of course, from the engineering perspective. It was feasible, let's say, structurally wise. But then we also did something. We said, okay, what if we make architecture about these gaps? And then with this, let's say, drawings that you see here, these proposals, we went to talk to the owners of these apartments. And we were thinking that the owners are not going to like having these openings, because basically what we thought is like, we separate the infill walls from the column. So now you have windows, or you have gaps. So the exercise here is that we have first regular windows, let's say normal, and then we start making them bigger and bigger. And here, for example, you see is a picture of the bedroom. It's an image of the bedroom, but we did it with the living room and some other room. And we asked the people, and we thought people is not going to like it, because we thought it's about privacy. But to our surprise, people was really keen. I'm talking about regular uses about this one. They really like it. They said, no, we can have a room that is full of glass and is really open. And we were really, really surprised about that. But, and here is the twist, they think that the glass is not safe because it's going to break during the earthquake. So on the one hand, you're receiving this feedback that is telling you, okay, we're open to have, for example, no infill walls in the upper part, but on the other hand, they don't want glass because they think the glass is going to hurt them in an earthquake. So my point here is that we need to involve the users and we need to understand how they use these spaces. And this makes me criticize the approach of the engineers, because the engineers mention the soft story as an architectural design problem. There are no engineers here. No? Is there any engineer here? Just me. Okay. So that's good. It would be great if there would be engineers, because then we can talk about this. The engineers, for example, here, they call it, this is a quote, architectural design mistake. They say the soft story is an architectural design mistake. And this is, my problem is not that they call it like that. My problem is that this approach, that approach means or puts the power to change this problem or to fix this problem on the architects. And I don't think we have the power, because it's not a design problem. It's a socio-cultural problem, especially in Turkey. That is the point I'm going to try to make through the rest of the presentation, which I should be running now. Because as I said before, the reason why we have soft stories is because we have commercial areas, while in the upper areas we have residential. Now, I'm not alone here, because you can say, okay, that is your idea. But in Nepal, they made a survey with same logic. They took these variations and they interview a lot of people. And then they show these different proposals, I mean, retrofitting proposals. And they also ask people how much they know about the soft story. It turns out that engineers, of course, 60% knew about soft story, which was very surprising that some engineers didn't know. But most of the builders, the people who make the houses, didn't know anything about the soft story. And we're going to see that the same problem we have in Turkey, because as I said before, more than 50% of the construction in Turkey is illegal. So if it's illegal, what does it mean? It means that the people who are building it is not controlled. And if they are not controlled, means that they don't know about the soft story. So we start seeing very similar things. And basically, the silver line here is that nobody, absolutely nobody, not engineers, not constructors, not users, accepted a solution that involved closing again the ground floor. So we come back to the point zero. So again, one of the results also of this survey is that in any intervention or any retrofitting that we want to make it work, we need to involve constructors, the users, the architects, and the engineers. So it's not a problem of engineering and architecture alone. I'm gonna go back I'm gonna make a sort of chronology, kind of quick, about Turkey. I'm gonna go back to certain things because I think we need to see it, not now from the perspective of engineering, but from an interdisciplinary perspective. We have earthquakes, as you see there, different magnitudes, different years, and all of them have soft story. So the question is, what can we find in the Turkish history in the last 100 years, of course, related with the key elements, related with building multi-story buildings, residential buildings, reinforced concrete, and earthquake. When did we start building and reinforced concrete? Is this typology of residential buildings on top and the ground floor commercial at a Turkish typology? And if so, where did it start and how? So I arbitrarily, this is very arbitrary, organize these periods with certain highlights. In 1939, there was a very big earthquake, 7.9, but also is the beginning of what is now the Turkish code. Is after that earthquake was produced. Of course, were the early years of the Republic, Turkish Republic. In 1965, there is an important event in Turkey, which is a law that is called the flat ownership law, which basically triggered the explosion of multi-story buildings in Turkey. It's triggered. And at the same time, between 1960 and 1970s in Turkey, there were many, many earthquakes. So the collapse of reinforced concrete buildings start to appear, start getting known and known. And then 1999, of course, we have the unfortunate Izmir Kocaeli earthquake with an incredible amount of damage. But also during those years, ready mix becomes very popular and new Turkish earthquake codes are produced. So that is the let's say highlights, and I'm going to revise it very quickly into this period. Before 1939, first of all, there was no earthquake code. And there was a significant earthquake in 1912 in the same area where the earthquake of Kocaeli, the earthquake in 1999 happened. It was the same area, and it was also 7 point something. But as you can read there, most of the construction was timber and masonry structure, and of course, houses. In the 1920s, the construction of apartments started or was developed in Ankara as a result mostly of, Ankara was found as well, this better than me, the capital of the republic. So the people start moving, and because they start moving to the new capital, there is a huge demand of buildings. And this is something I found very interesting. When there is a thesis, by the way, this is not my work, thesis, METU, and they study the development of the apartment block in Istanbul. And there is this relationship with the Ottoman house. And then they talk about this ground level that is blind. I mean, there are no windows. There is no relationship with the street, right? All the relationship with the street is produced in the upper floor because of the privacy. I mean, this is the Ottoman house. So when the first apartment follows several similar logic, they have these inner courtyards, and they create these kind of blocks that keep that privacy from the street. So one of the hypotheses here is that when the commercial areas appear, the reason why they appear is because they want to keep the privacy of the residential areas by creating a public area that is completely open to the street. So in a way, is a reinterpretation of the Ottoman house, but instead of having this wall that separated the private life from the public life, you have all this new front that appears that as a commercial area and open to the street. And again, the movement, I mean, the rising of Ankara as the capital imply that many people was traveling and was moving, living in the capital. So there was this huge demand of residents. I'm going to go there. In 1939, as I said before, in 1940, we have the first seismic zoning map. So basically, there were two big areas. There were the ones that were in risk, like this one, and the ones that didn't have any risk. This, of course, is very basic and evolved to the map I showed you at the beginning. During that period, because of the demand, the migration in the 1950s from rural areas to urban areas, there is a lot of self-production, self-construction. Then is when it started. So we have, again, a huge demand of construction. We have in the 1950s, so we're talking about almost 80 years ago, a lot of construction being done by the same people, the owners. It was not developed by any professionals. And at the same time, this building, this typology, 5-story reinforced concrete buildings that start appearing. This is a picture from Ankara that appears in Ankara and then spread from there to the rest of the country. The same type of building over and over again. And see, with the ground floor always having an opening. By 1965, by the 1960, 45% of the population in Istanbul, 60 in Ankara, and 33 in Izmir were living in gecekondu, which is, I guess you all know, but in case you don't know, are all these self-built, self-constructed buildings. again, basically self-construction. And you can see that in the major cities, the percentage is really, really significant. And again, we're talking about the 1960s. So what I'm trying to say is that when the earthquake in 1999 came, it was not really a surprise. If you look at the facts, if you start looking at this information, when a big earthquake comes and there is this level of damage, it's not a surprise because all the ingredients are here already. You have self-construction, no control, explosion demographics, bad quality of reinforced concrete, and there was no ready mix. I mean, all the concrete was in situ, was done there in the site, so no one could control it. The dosification is unknown. Then you have this recipe for disaster. And of course, as I said before, the flat ownership law in 1965 that produced basically an explosion of building construction. In 1967, there is this earthquake that is not really big, but is significant for the conversation that, well, the presentation I'm having here, because the city of Adapazaré is 90,000 people. Most of the damage were houses, but there were around 60 reinforced concrete buildings. Before, there were earthquake, of course, and there were damage, but most of them were houses. But now we start having damages in reinforced concrete multi-story buildings. This is the first one. Although, and already in the first one, 7, they already collapsed, fully collapsed. And this is interesting because when you look at the configuration, you realize that it's actually a soft story. This is a section, and this line represents infills. This is an infill walls, and then in the ground floor, there is no infill, it's open. Of course, again, we're talking about 1967, so the concept of soft story was not known in Turkey. So nobody talked about the soft story. But in when the reports were made by people, foreigners, Ambris is, I think he was from the United States, an engineer from the United States. When they start making this first report, they introduced the soft story problem. And the soft story problem, again, is associated to reinforced concrete all over the place. So after that, we have a lot of earthquakes there. And let me see what is important from here. By the 70s, for example, in cities like Istanbul, most of the landscape was mid-rise reinforced concrete and produced by self-construction. At the same time, only in 1969, here, the first reinforced concrete design code appeared. So basically before, they were making buildings of reinforced concrete with no code. So we have, again, as I said before, the recipe for disaster. We have an unplanned and uncontrolled urban growth. The cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, had a huge demand. No one is controlling where they are building. The buildings are getting taller and taller. People are adding flats over flats. And we don't have quality concrete. There is no control. Ready mix means that you produce it in a factory and then you sell it according to a certain dosification, certain dose. In situ means that you make the concrete there in the construction site. So no one is checking that, no one is controlling it. So you don't know what is the quality. So then we have several earthquakes in 1992, in the 90s. One is Erzincan again, I show you. We have a soft story there. I'm gonna go real quick this part because I want to go to the last and then I'm gonna conclude. In 1995, we have another earthquake. Please notice again, this earthquake was 6.3. And there are many buildings collapse. See here, many damage. It's around there were like 14,000 houses and buildings that were damaged with different levels. But again, it's a 6.3. It's not a large earthquake. In 1995, we have houses again, reinforced concrete with soft story. We have very strange collapse. You can see that one where the upper story basically stay there and the rest of the building collapse. And here, I didn't put any picture because I want to draw your attention over something. Here, 150 people died in this earthquake, which again is not a big earthquake, but most of the people die in few buildings, multi-story buildings made out of reinforced concrete. In other words, before the reinforced concrete buildings, we had houses collapsing, which is not good, but they were killing less people. With the multi-story reinforced concrete building collapsing, we might have less buildings collapsing, but the amount of people that is dying is huge. And the only comment I want to make about this one is, remember when I said to you at the very beginning, I said, remember, please keep in mind this Mexico earthquake. In Mexico, 1985, there were 8% of the buildings, 8th presented soft story. Look at here. In 1999, 7.4, in the Marmaris earthquake, 60% of the buildings that had a high level of damage presented soft story in Turkey. And then this is a different one. In 2011, they made a survey, 300,000 buildings, and about 78%, 78, almost 80% had some degree of soft story. And that percentage goes to 100 if the building is located in both sides of the street, so it's open to a commercial area. After the year 2000, we have new regulations, more strict regulations. Now, finally, the soft story is described as design irregularity in the codes. And we have a landscape where the majority of the population of Turkey is living in reinforced concrete buildings, apartment blocks. Again, we come to the last earthquake we know. We just want to say here that, again, this is soft story collapse, and nearly 25% of the buildings nearby cities in the epicenter had severe heavy damage. Very briefly, this study, and they propose adding shear walls to existing building, which is something I mentioned at the beginning. Adding shear walls is the best way to resist earthquake. They made the study with existing buildings, but there is a setback. They needed very regular buildings to retrofit. So for example, if you have balconies, they said, well, it's not suitable for this proposal. Again, still is interesting. So here I'm showing you a typical residential plan from Chile, where they built with shear wall. So you can see that the shear wall is actually incorporated in the design. That is a task for us. Here you can see some of the images. These are, of course, computer generated images about the retrofitting. You can see the difference. This is, of course, the original, I think. And this is the retrofitted one. You can see the shear walls now reaching the ground floor. Another one here, again, the existing situation, and then how we look with the shear walls reaching to the floor. And these are pictures of here, Izmir. These are new buildings exactly in the same locations where the previous building collapsed. Therefore, before there were buildings here in collapse completely. And you can see now that they started to change the architecture. For example, now you have a wall here that reaches the ground, which is how it should be. There is another shear wall here, and now you see here, again, another wall that goes all the way up The same here. And there is no soft story. There is no much cantilevers, no much balconies. So we start gradually shifting. I don't know who are the designers nor the engineers of these buildings. And to be honest, I don't like it much either. But I think we need to start working with this. The last thing I want to say, sorry, I'm a little bit extended. The last thing I want to say is that all this I'm putting on the table. As I said before, I don't have any answer. I'm putting the things, try to open the discussion. But something we all know, this is a picture, well, a screenshot actually, of the earthquake in Turkey, of course, and nearby areas that were of a magnitude larger than 7 in the last 100 years. So you can see there, of course, Kahramanmaraş is there. One is there. Well, there was another I forgot there. Well, of course, Izmir is here. Well, Samos is there, Izmir, and so on and so forth. So all this you can see the last 100 years. When it comes to 6 and 6.9, you see this, the amount of earthquakes that we have. And as I said before, I remind you of one of the conclusions of the study of the database. There will be one earthquake about 5.5 or larger that is going to kill people. And this is the amount of earthquake we have. So we are going to have earthquakes. And this, we need to have this conversation, maybe not now, but as architects and engineers, we need to have these conversations about what are we going to do with the building stock. Not only the existing one, but we're going to do towards the future. So that's it. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciated your presentation. Actually, the way you showed this performance models to us, how it works. I think, I mean, any contractor who wants to make money should see how it works. Probably his or her, approach will change afterwards. So that is really valuable in that sense. I just want to ask you about this approach of interdisciplinarity. I think I find it really important. I used to call it a lack of a coherent view when we have an earthquake, because, after each earthquake, there are these cliche TV programs, they make, and you see these figures of a geology engineer and a civil engineer talking about the same thing, the same people again and again. But we don't see much, for instance, urban planners, historians, economists, talking about it. Actually, it doesn't look their, initial, let's say, profession or specialization. But I think it is important because I think the whole story behind soft story begins, as you shown in the figures, for instance, in history. It seems that we haven't learned much from our history of making architecture, because the building itself is only the end product of architecture. I mean, it starts from our idealization, our way of civilization, the way we make urban environment, and so on. So I think I find it really important. You said different reasons for soft stories, for making soft stories. For instance, you say the lack of some structural elements, they remove them. And then they want to make higher stories and so on. Do you see what could be the actual reasons behind them? I mean, is it only those single cases doing it? I don't think so. But, what are the motivations of contractors or the users? Is it only, the lack of knowledge? Or there are, let's say, more hidden, let's say, reasons behind it? Just I wonder what you think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Well, first of all, I don't know. I am one of my motivations is to realize that after, like you said, after you explain the problem, it's kind of clear how you solve it. So it's not rocket science. So why there is no willingness to do it, to fix it, why we have it, and what it really, like the saddest part of this story, the whole thing we're talking today, is maybe tomorrow, in 6 months, or maybe 2 years, we're going to have another one, maybe here, even in Izmir, because we are expecting a big earthquake here. And we're going to go through the same story over again. And we're going to be all sad and that part. So that to me should be enough motivation. I mean, the willingness implies the understanding, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't occur. So I think there is this, I will call it this cultural inertia, which is not Turkish. I mean, is as human beings to make changes. We don't like to make changes. And so I'm trying to understand how far can we trace it back to understand how we can start changing it, you know? Yeah. Mm. Sure. Sure, but for example, you ask like the constructors. The problem is even in engineering, you deal with what we call probabilities. So, for example, the earthquake that we had in Kahramanmaraş is statistically the worst earthquake you can have in 2,475 years, 2,500 years, because what you have is a 2% probability of having that earthquake in 50 years. So basically, when the engineer is going to design the building, they have to put scenarios. And they ask the user, okay, are we going to design this building for 2% of having that terrible earthquake within the next 50 years? And that is return period of 2,500, which is what happened. But it's 2,500 years. So you might have it tomorrow. You might have it in 100 years. You might have it in 1,000 years from now. So there is always this I would say, this uh, distance in the lack of reminders. When, yeah. Mm. Yes, what I wanted to say is this. I think one thing it could be done is to keep reminding, to make it real, and that's why the the presentation today. That's why I focus on that aspect, to keep it present, to keep talking, because when I came here, it was 10 years ago. When I came here, I come from Chile, as you know. In Chile, we don't have this level of disaster, and we have magnitudes much larger. And so people ask me like, well, how do they do it in Chile? And I said, I thought at the beginning, I think it's because in Chile we have earthquakes more frequently. So you cannot really forget about the earthquake. It comes very quickly. And I thought at the beginning in Turkey, you don't have earthquake very often. So you don't have that reminder. Like if you do it wrong, it's going to collapse. But you have. So I think maybe Turkish people is too forgiving. they forget too quickly. You have to keep reminding them. I think that is the thing. So they don't think in long term. They think it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be there. Just keep it there. Maybe in 10 years nothing is gonna happen. Then we're not gonna be here. I really don't know. But I agree with you. I think the point is that we need to have this conversation, you know, the people who is studying the history of Turkey, to understand that, and not only engineers and architects, also constructors, builders. Thank you very much.
I grabbed the microphone from Burkay. Thank you, Mauricio. This was a very enlightening lecture for all of us. Earthquakes are part of our life, whether we forget it or not. So, but I have a technical question. You know, we're all very interested. I don't know if it's technical, but I'm thinking about the basement situation. If we had a basement with the soft story, so these models are really, really helpful for me to think about this. I feel like the situation is going to get worse because then we have something rigid at the top and at the bottom, but maybe not. Is it a good thing or not? Not a good thing or the same if we have a basement?
What you're describing is the reason for the only single building that collapsed in Chile in the last earthquake. Because of that, because in the basement, obviously, because it's underground and is usually the parking area, you have walls. So you have a very rigid system. Then you have columns, and then again, very rigid. So all the deformation concentrated, and then the building breaks. So when actually, yes, you need to consider the basement in the equation. Now I simplify it, but if you allow me to go back very quickly, this is the same problem that in the first one I show here. This you have two stories, see? Two soft stories actually, and the one is the basement. So yeah, well, you shouldn't make it more rigid either in the basement. And then there are some techniques to avoid that. But if you do it, then you have a double problem. Yes, that's true.
That was my
Ah.
You were telling about interdisciplinary, and the approach is so important. It's so important for energy efficiency and also, as you know, seismic design. And we love as architects to be flexible, to be fun, aesthetic, and we need to definitely have the interdisciplinary approach at some point. Which point do you think a seismic designer, a structural designer like you and an architect should sit together and start to discuss about the fun design, all these things that needs to be solved, because we cannot build the same building on and on of designers, and it's not the function that's seeking for that. Can you tell everyone the
no, I
students?
Can't. I can't, because who am I to say that? But one thing is that I will take from your comment and your question is that to my perspective is I don't see the solution, you know, but I think it's important to put the things on the table. And in my experience here in this university, is usually the ones that come up with the ideas and the changes are the students, not us. And I think that is very important, because if we make them think about this, if we make them aware of this, that's what we're doing here, raising awareness of this situation. They maybe in 10 years or maybe 5 years, hopefully 5 years, they will start seeing these solutions, how to do it. They will remember, oh, I remember that guy talking about the shear walls, so maybe we should use shear walls. And then because they are creative, and then they are less bound by rules and our own frameworks or egos, let's be honest, they can open this one. And I think that is our role, especially as a school of architecture, you know, to introduce this topic, and then they will figure out how to do it. I don't dare to say that I have anything to say about that. Just to put the topic.
Any other questions?
Thank you for presentation, Hocam.
You're welcome.
The earthquake force comes from the underground, and its forces distribute to upper floors, and if it cannot withstand the building collapse, it's clear. What I want to ask, why does more force affect the building than the ground floor, but how can increasing the floor height control the force?
You mean how rising the height of the building?
Yes. Why long columns control the force? It's kind of structural.
This is a column.
Architecture.
This is a column. Okay, this is the column. So now imagine that my hand is the foundation. Okay, so now we have a very short column here. So when I try to apply a lateral force, it doesn't bend much. I have to push it very hard to make the bending, right? Now we have the same column, but I'm gonna make it taller. Now you can imagine that it's really easy to bend. So what changed it? Again, am I now suddenly more strong? No. What happens is that the capacity of the column to resist lateral forces is called buckling capacity. And the buckling capacity is proportional to the height of the column. So the taller the column, the weaker, the flexible. Basically is that. So when you have two columns, one is longer than the other, and they have the same section, this is more flexible than this one. And if it's more flexible, it takes more deformation. And if it takes more deformation, it breaks.
Thank you, it's clear.
You're welcome. I should leave the stage to other people. Yeah, thank you.